Hi and welcome to the latest WZ2K video. In this tutorial we're going to take a look at using Photoshop and Lightroom together to take an image of a gig that I shot recently and make it something a little bit more interesting. Now if you're like me and you're just beginning with your gig photography, chances are you're not going to get the benefit of going to larger venues with pits, better lighting and so on. You're going to end up with venues that are quite small, lots of background distractions. In this case you can see we've got problems with the ceiling, microphone stands, etc. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a look at how we can take an image like this and turn it into something a little bit more interesting, like the next video. So you can see with this image we've got a little bit more interesting. We've got rid of the background distractions. We've introduced a lighting effect from the right hand side to make it look like there's some lights off stage. And it's just generally giving it a much more interesting feeling without the distractions, kind of capturing an emotion of the bass player, just make it a little bit more interesting. So we're going to start off by making some edits, some crops that we can do inside Lightroom, and then we'll switch over to Photoshop and take a look at how we can actually introduce some of these other elements in there, the fake lighting, burning out the background to get rid of the distractions and so on. So let's take a little look at what we're going to do to start off with. Start off by cropping and then we'll just move on. Okay, we've switched over to the develop module, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at cropping this image down. I don't like the distractions go over on the left hand side, so let's just switch on to the crop tool. Ensure that we've got it locked to constrain the aspect ratio, because we don't want to sort of change that and end up with a different shape on this particular image. And let's just drag that in until we get a crop that I'm happy with. Okay, that should do. So we've got rid of the distractions over the left hand side. We've still got all the mess and the roof and the mic stands and other paraphernalia we don't want, but that's okay for now. So we'll click on done. So we've got the crop we're looking for. Now as you can see, if I zoom in, we've got a fair amount of noise on there. We've shot this at ISO 1000. Obviously you can imagine we're not using flash or anything like that, but because we're going to use the dodge tool and the burn tool later on to actually enhance the background and darken everything down, I'm not going to be too concerned about that problem. And when it comes to gig photography, a certain amount of noise actually adds to the atmosphere of the shot itself. What I will do though is we've got this little blemish, could be a mark on the lens, so what I'm going to do is we're just going to choose the spot removal tool, use the left hand square bracket, the right hand square bracket to enlarge the area you're going to work with, take that out, click on close and we're done. Just zoom back out. And you see we've got a bit of a dust bunny over here on the right hand side, so we'll do the same thing again. Use the right bracket to enlarge the area and we'll just click on close. Okay, that'll work for me. Now we can go in and we can make some tweaks to things like the clarity and things like that, so let's give it a bit more contrast by upping the clarity. Enhances the colours, and because we're working with sort of gig photography in a darker room with lots of colourful lights in there, in this case we've got a bluey purple light, it really does give a false sense of colour, but it makes it interesting. So we can adjust the vibrancy on that if we decide we want to just punch it up a little bit. If you find it's a bit too much colour going on there, you can reduce the saturation down if you find that works better for you. But for me, if I'm honest, I quite like that saturated look on this particular image. It's working well for me. We don't really have any blown highlights. In all honesty, the colours of the actual bass player himself, they're fine. That's the main focal point of this, because everything else is going to be taken to almost blackness. Besides, we can also come back in later on if we decide we want to make some alterations to the colours, want to saturate, desaturate, etc. We can do that later on after we've made our edits inside of Photoshop. But for now, I've done everything I need to do inside Lightroom. We're going to switch over to Photoshop and continue editing this particular file. Okay, so we're going to switch over to start editing inside of Photoshop. Several ways of doing this. We can use the keyboard shortcut of Control E. We can right click anywhere on the image and choose edit in Adobe Photoshop, which is what we'll do in this instance. And I'll say render using Lightroom. Okay, we're in Photoshop. So first thing we're going to do is start working with a duplicate background. So I'm going to do Control J to duplicate. So we now know that anything we do is going to work on layer 1, which we'll now rename to edited image. That means that if we make any changes that we don't like, we can always revert back to the background, which is completely unedited. Okay, first things first. Let's just go and choose the burn tool. We've got three options that we can work with. We've got the midtones, so any of the burning that we do will only affect the midtones within this image, or we can change that to shadows or highlights. The other option we've got then is exposure. Now normally when you're working with an image you want to be very selective in the amount of exposure that you use, normally around sort of 3 to 7%, because you don't want a hugely noticeable effect. You want a lot of control so you can paint the effect in slowly. But for this example we want to actually affect it quite quickly, because we want to take all of this over on the right hand side and behind the bass player and pretty much take that down to black. And the benefit of that means that we're going to lose all this background distraction, the mic stand and so on. We'll keep the detail in the actual bass player's mic stand so we can see what he's doing, but it's a pretty simple effect that we're going to work with. So let's just choose shadows to start off with, and we'll set the effect down to about 20%. We don't want to go mental with this. Just select the right layer, and we can now start painting. If we make any mistakes we could undo this, but for now let's just start painting in it, and you should see straight away that all of these tiles and all the marks in the ceiling start to disappear to blackness. And we'll do the same. We'll go around behind the bass player's head, over his shoulders, and start painting this in. Now I haven't let go of the mouse, so if I know that for any reason I make a complete and utter mess of this, I can just simply let go and I've got one step to undo. But this is pretty much working fine for me. I'm going to use the left bracket and zoom in, just so we can get a bit closer to the detail around his face, around the mic stand. Now we want to leave the light definition to actually show some separation from the background for the mic stand and so on, but we don't really care too much about what's going on around behind him, behind his arms. So we're using this particular technique to take as much of that to blackness as possible while still retaining the information around the bass headstock, some separation with the microphone stand and the leads, just so we can kind of see what's going on there. So I'm going to zoom in again, just so I can see what we're doing around his head. Any marks that I'm not happy with, just using the square brackets left and right to either enlarge or reduce what I'm painting. So moving on, we're just going to move around the image, see what parts of it need to be burned to get rid of any excess illumination. But that's all looking pretty good. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is actually lighten his face up a little bit, because where we've gone over and burnt things, he's kind of falling away into the shadow a bit too much for my liking. So we're just going to switch over to the dodge tool, take this down to about 15%, and then what we can do is we just enlarge the brush. Mid-tone should be fine to start off with, and we can just start lightening his face up to get that separation from the background. Just bring his face out a little bit, so not a huge amount, but if I undo that you can see that we've got a little bit more brightness in the face. We can go over again until we're 100% happy with that. And anywhere else you feel that you could do with bringing some of that lost light out. So it's the same for the headstock. We'll just reduce the brush size down, bring a bit of that back, and I can see I need to burn a little bit more by here where we haven't quite got it spot on. So we'll just switch back over to the burn tool, slightly larger brush, and just quickly go over any areas that they just look like they need darkening down a little bit more. Okay, that's looking good. A little bit more on the base and the bottom, and we're good to go. So what I'm doing is basically looking for distractions, anything that I see that I think actually needs to be removed from the image to make it overall more interesting. That's all I'm doing. So if we zoom out a little bit now, we should see we've got rid of most of those areas. A couple more over his shoulder, behind him, around the jaw. Oh well, that's not too bad. Switch back over to the dodge tool. This time we'll take the shadows and go over the face a little bit more just to bring it out, just to lighten him up, get that separation. Same with the mic. Okay, that's the actual dodging and burning pretty much done for now. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to introduce the lighting coming in from the right hand side, the top right hand side. Now if we take a look at the picture, you can see that we've got an overall bluey red tint to it, sort of purpley blue colour coming in from this angle, which means that if we introduce a light from the top right hand side, it's not going to look completely off and fake, because that's the kind of colour we've got in the image. Obviously if we had a red tone coming in on the face, or a yellow or something along those lines, we need to introduce colours that actually match the picture. But in this instance, a good bluish tone, a purpley blue tone, is perfect for this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at sampling a colour from the image to make sure that the colour palette that we're using for these lights coming in from the top right hand side work within this particular image. So what I'm going to do is just choose the eyedropper tool, zoom in, and just choose a colour that I think is going to work. So we sort of take this bluish tone on the mic stand. We can use that as a base colour. No, let's actually take a different colour. Let's take one of these sort of burgundy kind of colours from his face. The beauty of this is we can change this and mess about, and we can tweak until we get something that we're 100% happy with. Let's find something. Yeah, this is getting better. Nice bluey purple kind of colour coming in. Okay, that works for me. So we'll click OK. Now we don't want to work directly on the image. We want to work on a copy or on another layer. So if we find that we don't like it, we want to add any adjustments to it, things like that, we can do that without affecting the actual image itself. So let's just create a new layer. Zoom out, Control minus, and we just pan over to the corner we want to work with. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a rectangular shape, and we're just going to fill that with the color that we're working with, but we're going to use a gradient. So if we just choose the gradient tool, expand the gradient tool palette, and we just choose foreground to transparent, then simply hold the shift key down on the keyboard, draw a straight line, and we get our purple light. Now what we're trying to achieve here is the fact that as light comes from the actual light itself into the darkness, it's going to fall off quite quickly, and that's what we're emulating by using this gradient. We can deselect now with a Control D on the keyboard, and then we can do is Control T for transform, then right click over the transform, and we'll just choose perspective. So what we're going to do now is create a sort of light arc. Don't have to be particularly that precise with this, in all honesty. It's not that important. And then we're just going to click rotate, bring this in then to the rough angle that we're looking to have the light coming from. Once we're happy with that, press the enter key, choose the move tool, and bring that up to the top corner. Now at the moment this looks completely fake, so what we need to do is we need to soften the edges of this to give it more fall off and make it look a little more natural. So ensure we got layer 1 selected, which just for the ease we'll just rename that, and we'll just call that light ray 1. So with that layer selected, we'll just go to the filter menu, come down to blur, choose Gaussian blur, and we're going to use a value that kind of works. And this is going to be dependent upon the resolution of the image that you're working with and your own personal taste. But I'm going to go quite high with this, up to about, yeah, that's working, up to about 100 pixels. Click OK. We should got the move tool selected and just drag that up into the corner. Now it's fallen off a bit quick for my liking, so what I'm going to do is just do Control T for transform, drag it and adjust the shape and size a little bit more, until I'm 100% happy with the effect. I'm going to duplicate that layer, so we'll do Control J, so we get a second light. What we're going to do is we're going to do Control T, rotate that round a little bit, change the size of it so it looks like there's more than one light source coming in. Press enter when we're finished, and adjust the opacity so they don't look quite so evident. So again, you're going to adjust these to your own personal taste, adjust the position so you're happy with it, adjust the general effect so you've got exactly what you're looking for, so you're 100% happy with the way it all looks. So what we're trying to achieve is, as the lights fall off and overlap each other, you can see that we've got a strip down the middle where the two lights overlap that intensifies that particular strip of colour. Okay, that's kind of working okay for me. So we now look like we've got the lights coming in from the top right hand side. Just position those out that way. We've burnt the background out. We've done everything we kind of want to do with this. So what I'm going to do is, I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to flatten the image, file and save, and that'll take us so we can go back into Lightroom with the edited image, and we can carry on working inside Lightroom. Okay, we're back in Lightroom now with the image that we've edited inside Photoshop. So if we want to now, we can make a couple of additional tweaks. We can adjust the colors, we can do whatever we want with it. So what I'm going to do is, some of the things I generally tend to do with mine, I'll come into the effects and I'll just put a slight amount of vignetting on, which what that'll do is, it'll only really be noticeable in this image in the top right hand corner where we've got the lights coming in, but it allows it to sort of show a slight fall off of the lens, and it reduces the amount of intensity we've got coming in from the light sources in the top right hand side. We could have done it in Photoshop, but certain things just generally tend to be a little bit quicker and easier inside Lightroom. We can make some tweaks to the exposure, so we can just bring a bit of lightness back if we want to, if we think it's a bit dark. Adjust the clarity. Now you're probably thinking, well, you adjusted the clarity in the first video, or first part of this video, but everything is set back to 0. Well, that's because we're actually working on a copy of the original file that we edited inside Lightroom. When we open that in Photoshop, it creates a duplicate copy with the adjustments we created in Lightroom, but when we go back into Lightroom from the edits inside Photoshop, everything is zeroed out because we're not working on the original file we edited, we're working on a copy that Lightroom creates for us. So those edits have been applied, but what we need to do now is, or what we can do, is we can come in and apply them on this image as a new image, as opposed to being the original image with the edits, gone into Photoshop, change what we wanted there, come back in and carry on editing on the same file. So let's just bump the vibrance up a little bit. I'm just going to increase the saturation ever so slightly just to give a bit more warmth to the overall image. Actually, I'm going to put the exposure back down. Don't really like that too much. And if you want to set the values back to what they were originally, you can just simply double click on the exposure in this example, or contrast and so on, and that'll set it back to its defaults, which in this case is 0. So let's just take a look. We can bump some of the whites up. If we want to, we can drop the blacks down if we find that we're seeing some of the background details showing through. If we make any exposure changes, and we can just tweak to taste. But overall, I think that's working quite well. Now obviously I've not taken too much time on this. On the original edit that I did for the actual band in question and for the charity event, I spent a lot more time doing it. But what I wanted to show you in this video is how you can take an image that looks okay, but with a lot of background distractions, and turn it into something a little bit more interesting with the introduction of the lights coming in from the top right hand side, the expression on the bass player's face sort of lost in the emotion of playing, and it just makes it for a more interesting shot with a couple of simple edits inside Lightroom, jumping over to Photoshop to make some changes, dodging and burning the image, creating a lighting effect on the top right hand side, and then bringing it all together by making some final tweaks inside of Lightroom to give us the final image. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you find that it'll help your gig photography and give you shots that you may have previously thrown away a new lease of life. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Alternatively, pop over to WZ2K, post on the forums, get involved in the website, or join the Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to putting some new tutorials together for you soon. In the meantime, take care, and I'll be back soon.